Jake had been on the road for years, but he'd never known rage like this. His loyal dog, Bandit, was gone snatched right from his truck while he was fueling up. The thieves thought they were in control. But what they didn't know was that Bandit wasn't just any dog, and Jake wasn't just any trucker. This was a mistake they wouldn't live to make twice. They took the wrong dog, and now they're about to pay the price. What would you do in Jake's shoes? Let us know in the comments. Like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more thrilling stories. The desert air was thick with dust as Jake pulled his truck into a rundown roadside diner, the neon sign flickering in the fading sunlight. He was used to long hauls, endless highways, and empty landscapes. But ever since he picked up Bear, a stray mutt that had been wandering the truck stop weeks ago, the road didn't seem so lonely. Bear sat by his side in the passenger seat, ears perked, eyes scanning the world like he always did. He was no ordinary dog, big, sharp, and eerily aware. Jake had learned quickly that Bear wasn't just a pet, he was a protector. As Jake stepped out of the truck, Bear followed. A few other truckers loitered outside, smoking, swapping stories. But there was another group, 2-3 men, leaning against a black SUV, their eyes locked on Jake and his dog. Jake could feel the weight of their stares but ignored them as he walked inside. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and old grease, the kind of place that felt like home to men like Jake. He ordered as usual and sat near the window where he could keep an eye on Bear, who had settled under the truck like he always did. The men from outside walked in a few minutes later, their heavy boots clunking against the tile floor. They didn't sit. Instead, they stood by the counter, exchanging low murmurs and occasional glances in Jake's direction. Bear let out a low growl from outside. One of the men, a tall, wiry guy with a scruffy beard, smirked. "Nice dog you got there," he said, loud enough for Jake to hear. Jake didn't look up from his coffee. "Yep." The man chuckled. "Big fella. Bet he's worth a lot. Trained, ain't he?" Jake finally glanced at him. "He's not for sale." The guy's smirk widened. "Didn't say I wanted to buy." The air in the diner shifted. The few regulars who had been chatting went quiet, eyes flicking between Jake and the men. Jake took another sip of his coffee. "You're wasting your time." The second man, bulkier and meaner looking, laughed. "Man's got himself a guard dog and thinks he's untouchable." Jake finally set his mug down. "I don't think anything. I know." His voice was calm, steady. The first man, the one with the smirk, shrugged. "Guess we'll see." With that, they turned and left. The door swung shut behind them, leaving an uneasy silence in their wake. Jake watched as they stepped outside, one of them lighting a cigarette, another taking a slow, deliberate look at Bear. Bear was standing now, tail low, body stiff. He knew. Jake finished his coffee, tossed some cash on the table, and stepped outside. By the time he reached his truck, Bear was gone. And so were the men. Jake's heart pounded as he scanned the empty lot. Bear was gone, his usual spot under the truck vacant, paw prints scattered in the dirt. The men in their black SUV were nowhere in sight. His gut twisted. He knew exactly what had happened. Clenching his fists, he took a deep breath and forced himself to think. No panic. Panic didn't help. He glanced around, searching for anyone who might have seen something. The old diner owner, Lou, stood by the doorway, wiping his hands on his greasy apron. "Saw them drive off, headed west," he muttered, shaking his head. Knew they were trouble the moment they walked in. Jake nodded, jaw tightening. West meant desert roads, long stretches of nothing, places people went when they didn't want to be found. Reaching into his truck, he grabbed his revolver from the glove box and checked the cylinder. Loaded. He slid it into his waistband. This wasn't just about a stolen dog. Bear wasn't just some mutt. He was family. And these men had made a mistake. Miles down the road, in the back of a speeding SUV, Bear thrashed against his restraints. A thick rope bound his legs, and duct tape wrapped around his muzzle. He growled low, eyes burning with rage, but the men only laughed. "Damn mutt's got some fight in him," one of them chuckled. The driver smirked. "Yeah? He'll fetch us a nice payday." The biggest of the three, a brute named Rick, turned in his seat. "Shame though," he said, pulling out a knife and twirling it between his fingers. "Might be easier to get rid of him now." Bear's growl deepened. His muscles tensed. The driver glanced in the rearview mirror. "Do what you want once we get off the highway. No mess in the car." Rick grinned, flipping the knife in his hand. Bear's eyes flicked to the window. The car was going fast, but not fast enough. He shifted his weight, preparing to do something reckless. Back on the highway, Jake's foot pressed the gas pedal harder. His truck roared forward, his mind locked on one thought. They took the wrong damn dog. And they were about to find out exactly why. Jake had been patient. He had been calm. But now, staring at the tire tracks leading off the highway and into the desert, something inside him snapped. They thought he was just some trucker, just another guy on the road with nothing to fight for. They were dead wrong. He pulled his rig onto the dirt road, kicking up a cloud of dust as he followed the tracks. He could see their SUV in the distance, parked near a rocky outcrop. The doors were open. Shadows moved near the vehicle. They were out in the open. Good. Jake reached under his seat and pulled out his sawed-off shotgun. He hadn't had to use it in a long time, but his hands still moved like muscle memory, loading 2 shells with a smooth, practiced motion. He tucked a hunting knife into his boot, then slid a revolver into his waistband for good measure. He was done playing nice. Stepping out of the truck, he moved low, sticking to the shadows of the boulders. Voices drifted through the airlofter, cocky, careless. Then a growl. Bear. Jake's grip tightened on the shotgun. He peered around the rock and saw them 3 men standing by the SUV, Bear struggling against his restraints. Rick held a knife, tapping it against his palm. Maybe we get rid of him now, make this easier. Jake took a slow breath, steadying himself. Then he stepped out. You boys picked the wrong damn dog. The gang spun, their cocky expressions twisting into shock. Jake raised the shotgun. Now he said, his voice cold and steady, "Let him go." Rick's smirk faltered as the cold steel of Jake's shotgun aimed straight at his chest. The other 2 gang members froze, their hands twitching near their weapons. But the dead seriousness in Jake's eyes told them one thing: this wasn't a man to gamble with. "You don't want to do this, old man," Rick sneered, masking his nerves. "This ain't your fight." Jake stepped closer, his boots crunching against the dry dirt. "You stole my dog," he said, his voice as firm as iron. "That makes it my fight." Rick flicked his knife open, but the moment his fingers twitched, Jake fired. The shotgun blast was deafening in the open desert air. The shot hit just inches from Rick's feet, sending up a spray of dirt and rock. Rick stumbled back, his bravado crumbling as he realized how close he had just come to death. "Next one won't miss," Jake warned. One of the gang members panicked, drawing his pistol, but before he could even aim, a blur of fur lunged at it. Bear. The dog had ripped through the rope they had tied him with and now came charging like a bullet, his deep growl sending terror through the gang. He slammed into the man's chest, knocking him to the ground, teeth bared just inches from his face. The man screamed, dropping his gun as Bear's snarling muzzle hovered over his throat. Rick, now shaking, dropped his knife. Okay, you can take the damn dog." Jake tilted his head. "Oh, I know I can." The remaining gang member threw his hands in the air. "Man, I didn't even want to be part of this." Jake kept the shotgun trained on Rick. "You like picking on folks who can't fight back, huh? Thought you could steal a trucker's best friend and just walk away?" Rick swallowed hard. "It was just a job, we didn't know it was yours." Jake scoffed. "Then you're even dumber than I thought." The sound of approaching engines rumbled in the distance. The gang turned their heads just in time to see a convoy of big rigs rolling onto the dirt road. Jake grinned. Truckers. A dozen rigs lined up, their chrome grills gleaming in the last light of day. The doors flew open and tough, seasoned truckers stepped out. Men who had spent their lives on the road, men who looked out for their own. Rick looked around, realizing how completely and utterly outnumbered he was. "You're done," Jake said simply. Rick's knees nearly gave out. The man who had been bragging and laughing just moments ago now looked like a cornered rat. His gang was already backing away, realizing there was no winning this. "Here's what's gonna happen," Jake continued. "You're gonna leave my dog, leave my truck, and you're gonna walk back to whatever rat hole you crawled out of." Rick nodded furiously, his pride crumbling in front of everyone. Jake stepped forward, eyes locked on Rick. "And if I ever see your face again, it won't be my shotgun you have to worry about." He nodded toward Bear, who was still standing over the other thug, his fangs inches from his throat. Rick didn't say another word. He just ran. His crew followed, stumbling over themselves as they disappeared into the desert, humiliated, broken. Jake turned to Bear and knelt. The dog wagged his tail, panting hard. "Good boy," Jake said, rubbing his head. The truckers cheered, and Jake let out a breath. Bear was safe. And those punks? They'd never forget the day they messed with the wrong trucker. Jake watched the last of the gang disappear into the horizon, their figures swallowed by the endless desert. The rumble of truck engines behind him was a comforting sound as people had shown up, and justice had been served. But as he turned back toward his rig, it wasn't the victory that settled in his chest. It was something deeper. Bear. The dog sat by the truck, His ears perked up, his tail wagging slightly, waiting for his owner to come back. Jake knelt beside him, reaching out to scratch behind his ears. Bear leaned into the touch, letting out a soft, contented sigh. "You saved my life back there," Jake murmured. The words felt strange. Had always been the protector, always the one making sure trouble didn't follow him. But tonight? Tonight, it was Bear who had stood between him and danger. One of the truckers, a burly man named Earl, stepped forward, adjusting his cap. "Hell of a dog you got there, Jake." Jake gave a slow nod. "Yeah, he is." He looked back at Bear, shaking his head. "Found him on the side of the road, half-starved, like the world had already given up on him." Earl chuckled. "Guess he wasn't done fighting." Jake smirked, patting Bear's side. "Number he wasn't." The other truckers lingered for a moment before tipping their hats and heading back to their rigs, knowing Jake needed a moment alone. The engines roared to life one by one, headlights cutting through the twilight. They'd spread the word no one would dare mess with a trucker's dog again. Jake sat on the truck's step, Bear lying down beside him, head resting on his boots. The weight of the night settled over him, but so did a thought that wouldn't shake loose. How many times had Bear been overlooked? How many times had people seen a stray and just kept driving? Just like those thieves had assumed Jake was just another old man, another easy target, the world had assumed Bear was just another lost cause. But they had both proved the world wrong. Jake let out a slow breath, staring at the horizon. "Ain't about where you come from, is it, boy?" he said softly. Bear thumped his tail in agreement. He thought back to the thieves, to the way they had laughed, to the way they had assumed they had all the power. In the end, it wasn't strength that beat them. It was loyalty. It was the kind of bond that couldn't be bought, stolen, or broken. Bear wasn't just a dog. He was family. Jake looked down at his old companion, shaking his head with a quiet chuckle. "Guess I owe you a steak dinner, huh?" Bear perked up at the word steak, his tongue lolling out in anticipation. Jake pushed himself up, stretched his shoulders, and opened the truck door. "Come on, boy, let's get out of here." Bear jumped into the passenger seat like he had been born for it. The truck rumbled to life, and as they pulled onto the open road, Jake felt something settle inside him. Some things in life you don't take for granted, some bonds you don't break. And if there was one thing he knew now, it was this. A trucker and his dog? That was a loyalty no man should ever mess with. What about you? Have you ever had a pet that stood by your side no matter what? Tell us your story in the comments. And don't forget like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more real stories from the road.